So we're at the Salesforce homepage. You go to your name, you click on it, and then you see Developer Console. And like I said, you have to be an admin in a production or sandbox environment to use this. Click on Developer Console, and it opens up a new window. And this new window right here is where you're actually going to gather your Apex code, where you're going to execute it, and where you're going to find the debug and kind of get an idea of what you've just done. So if we click on this debug link right here, there's a link here that says Open Execute Anonymous. And that Open Execute Anonymous right there opens up another little window for us. As you can see right now, I've got some old code that I was using, that I was playing around with, and that I had executed before, where I was updating all of the accounts from a particular list to read this in the description. This is for the webinar, where I was doing a little demonstration. But let's delete that, and let's start from scratch. So from your debug window, your execute anonymous window, you can execute any code that does anything you want in Salesforce directly from here without having to build an Apex class or a trigger or anything like that. So there are times where, even if you're not testing something, you may just want to write a quick script to update a bunch of records. You could do that from here. But let's start with just going through some simple things. Let's declare a couple of Apex variables and then see what we get out of them. So what I want to do is I want to start by declaring a string, and we're going to call this string x. And then we're going to say x equals, webinar. Now, a string is really just a series of any characters, usually numbers and characters of any sort, alphanumeric of any kind it can hold. So we're going to do string x, and then we're going to call our variable webinar. We're going to actually assign it a value of webinar. And then I want to know what the system actually understands from that. So I'm going to type in system.debug, put this in parentheses and say, and then I'll say this is my string x, and then I'll say plus, and I'll say I want to return x. So I want to know what my x now looks like. So I've declared it. I've assigned it a value. Whoops. Should probably spell that right. And then I'm going to return exactly what that's telling me. So let's click on execute right here. I've also got this checked right here, open log. If I don't have that checked, I have to open the log after the fact. I always want to open the log after I execute some sort of code. So I'm going to click on execute right here. It thinks about it. Here's my log record down below, and here's the log that opened up for me. Now I can scroll all the way through this log if I want to, but I want to see my debug. I want to see what I had actually asked it to tell me. So in that system.debug, if I click right here, debug only, that will only show what I've actually created. So here's my string, and it's telling me, so for string x, your variable, here's what returned, webinar. Well, I now know that my Apex code worked, because I told it I want to assign string x a value of webinar. So let's go back to our execute anonymous window. Now what's nice is when I go back to the open execute anonymous window, it actually shows me the code that I just executed again. And here we go. Yep, it returned webinar exactly as I was hoping. So if I do this, x is equal to webinar, and then x is equal to talking. Now if I execute that, it'll show you what our debug says. Click on debug only. Since string x was equal to talking was the second command I had given the assignment of that string, it's going to return to me talking. So let's go back to our debug, open execute anonymous. Let's actually put another system debug in the middle. So I've duplicated that. So I want to know what x is after I do this, and then I want to know what x is after I do this. Let's click on execute, and we'll check our debug again. Yep, it's webinar, and then it's talking. Hey, that's great news. So now I know that I can assign this string any value that I want, and I can debug it as I'm going through. So as I'm doing any kind of an operation, I can view what that particular, I can actually view what that result comes out to be. So let's go back to our open execute anonymous window. Let's now do this. Let's do a SQL query. Let's actually return a list of accounts. And I'm going to call this list account list. and that's going to be a new list of accounts. I'm not going to give it any parameters, and I'm going to close it out. Whoop, you need to spell it right. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to populate this list. So let's suppose in a Apex class or trigger or something like that, all I want to do is grab a list of records, and in this case we're just going to look at them, but then we're going to do something fun to them. So a list account list equals new list account. So now I want a system debug. Actually, I want a SQL query first. So I want to say account list, which is the name that I gave this list. So I want to pull a bunch of records into a list. Account list equals select ID, name from account. No conditions. We're just going to pull a list of all of our accounts, and we're going to put it into that variable, which I call the account list. And now we want to do a system.debug, just like we had done before. And we want to say, oops, this is my account list. And then we're going to put our account list variable name into that system debug. Now I'm going to execute that. So I'm going to execute, first of all, that I'm going to declare a list. So I'm telling the computer, hey, I'm going to make a list, and then I'm going to assign my list some value, which is just a query directly into my Salesforce records, and then I'm going to return what exactly is coming into my list. Now let's click execute. Now you'll notice I'm going to be executing this entire code. So I should get something back for both of those values of X, and then something for my list. So let's click on execute. Let it think. Click on debug only. And then you'll see right here, here's that string, webinar. Here's the string again, talking. And then here's my account list. And you'll see right here, out of the account table, I have one record. The name is fourth one. Here's the ID. Next one, seventh one. There's the ID, name, this one, yada, yada, yada. If I go all the way down, I should have all the accounts that exist in the system. And as you can see, it's longer than the output right here. But if I double click on it, I get my full output right there. And there's the list of all the accounts that I wanted to look at. Well, now let's go back to our debug log. Actually, not our debug log. Let's go back to the Excel. I'll put execute anonymous window. And let's put a condition in there. Let's see where billing state, and I think that's the right API name, is equal to NY. Let's see if we have some New York accounts in there. And let's actually return billing state. Now if I execute that, I might have the wrong API name. Oh, maybe not. There we go. Now if we do debug only, we should see here's the accounts that should only be returned that belong in New York. And it looks like I only have one. I only have one account that's a New York account. And we obviously, because of our SQL query condition of New York, we pulled in billing state equals New York, and that's the United Oil and Gas Corporation, which is just one of the test records that's automatically there when you set up Salesforce. And there you go. So I'm starting to get that output. Let's do this then. Let's actually go to debug, open execute anonymous list. I'm sorry, open execute anonymous window. As you can see, my code's getting bigger. Let's actually change webinar. I'm sorry, let's actually change talking. We'll get rid of this one, so we're only going to assign it one value. Let's change, instead of talking, let's change that to the abbreviation for the state of Utah. And now I'm actually going to create a loop here for our account list, and I'm going to update the accounts that have New York as their billing state to Utah. So let's actually do this. Let's say for my list of accounts, for account, let's give it a variable of A, account list. So now it says for the records that are accounts, we're going to call them A. Now look in, that's what this stands for, look in account list. So we're going to go and iterate through each of those records. I want to assign A.billing state will be equal to X. So now what I'm going to do is in my list, I'm actually going to change any accounts where New York is true into the value of X in that same field, billing state. So I'm going to put Utah in those fields as opposed to New York. And then I'm going to return again that same account list. System.debug. This is my account list after I update the billing state with X. And we're going to pull that account list again. So I'm going to pull the account list out, make a change to all the records in that list. In this case, it's only one. And then I'm going to look at that list again. So let's click on Execute. Let's make sure I didn't leave anything out. Yep, let's click on Execute. Go to Debug Only. Okay, so here's the list before. We can see we have a state of New York. Here's the list after. You can see that now we have a state of Utah. Now, if there are a whole bunch of records inside my account list, it would have updated all of them to Utah. So in this case, we have New York, we have Utah now for this one account. But that did not change in my Salesforce instance. So if I actually find the account, which was United Oil, let's pull them all up. We'll be on our next page. United Oil and Gas Corp in New York. You'll see right here I did not update that billing state. It's still New York. But that doesn't mean I can't. So let's go back to our Execute Anonymous window, which is right here. Let's go back over here, Debug, open Execute Anonymous window. So just because I assigned a new value of it, or to the list in the actual, just because I changed the value of the billing state in the list does not mean it updated it in Salesforce. I haven't done a DML operation. So at this point, I can say update account list. So now, for every record in that list, I'm going to update the entire list. Here's how you get around DML operations for multiple records. So if you have multiple records you have to update at once, there is a DML operation limit that Salesforce has for you. So to avoid that, a lot of times you can put all of your records into one list, and then from that list, you can update the list, and that's considered one DML operation. So right here, update account list. If I click Execute, and the debug should look pretty much exactly like we had it before, which it does. It was New York before. I changed it to Utah. Now let's look in Salesforce. Since I told it to update that list, let's look in Salesforce. Here's our account, United Oil and Gas Corp, and they're in New York, right here. Let's now refresh this page and see what happens. Because I've already executed the code, let's see if I updated my record. There you go. And now I've got United Oil and Gas Corp is no longer in New York. They're now in Utah because I changed it. And there you have it. So that Apex code, I just made an adjustment to a record. Let's actually change that back to New York because that doesn't make any sense. Then we'll click Save. Oops. Click on Save. All right. So that's how you handle a DML operation on a list in Developer Console. Now there's a number of other things that I suggest practicing with in Developer Console and also in Salesforce. In general, is learning how to play with your lists and also with sets and maps. These are called your collections. So let's open the Execute Anonymous window. There we go. Let's delete some of the things we had before. We don't need X anymore, so let's get rid of that. So let's delete that. Let's get rid of our condition. Actually, we don't want to update it anymore, so let's get rid of that. And since we're not doing the update, we can get rid of this debug right here. And we don't want to update the list because we're not doing anything to it now. Okay. So as we can see right here, here's account list. Select ID, yada, yada, yada. Let's get rid of that condition because we want to pull back all of our records. We execute that. Obviously, it should just be our list of all records. Let that load. We should see all those records in there. Whoops. Debug. Here's all those records. These are all the accounts that exist in my CRM. Let's go back to Open Execute Anonymous window. Now what I want to do is I actually want to create a map. Or let's create a set first. A set is a series of unordered unique IDs or unique items that you need to exist in a set. So for example, let's suppose I make a query of some particular table. In this case it would be accounts, and I want only the ones that exist in Idaho or something like that. I could put a condition in there, but then I say, well, I really want all those IDs in one place so that I can look at those IDs later to do another query. Maybe I want to see only the contacts that belong to those accounts. So let's do that. Let's actually create a set of IDs, and we're going to call this account IDs equals a new set, so I'm declaring it ID. You can have different kinds of sets of strings and whatnot. In this case, we want to have IDs directly out of Salesforce. So we want a new set of IDs. And how we're going to get that set populated is we're actually going to grab that list, that account list of all of our accounts, and as we go through that list, we're going to throw those IDs into our little set, and then we're going to look at that set. So let's say for account list, or sorry, for account A, account list, I want to add to account IDs our set account IDs.add, and I want to put in the A.ID. And then we'll close that out. And then I want to look at it. System.debug. And we want to put in, this is the account IDs set. Oops. And we want to refer to this variable, which is account IDs. And then let's execute this code. I did something wrong here. Hang on a second. Oh. Unexpected token. So I've got a somewhere in here I forgot to either add something or put the wrong value in. So let me look for it. Hang on a second. Let's execute just that highlighted part. Okay, so my code's got to be in here somewhere. It's not going to like that. Yeah, it's not there. For my account A, account list, account IDs.add, A.ID. So that should be fine. Let's make sure that this code executes fine. All right, so I put a, oh, there we go. That's what it was. I did put the open and close parameter on that. Okay, so let's execute. We should be fine now. Okay, let it run. And now, so I've taken all of those IDs out of the accounts and I've placed them into a set. So now you'll see, instead of a list of records for my query, you'll now see that I have just a list of all the IDs of all the accounts that exist in my system right here. This is the account ID set. Now we can technically make a set out of any value that exists in my account table. We can change the set type to a string, and then we can say a dot. Let's try that. Let's actually do billing state. That same field we were looking at before. Now, if we execute that, go to our debug. There you go. Now I've got all of the values that exist in one set. So what if I want to do a query in another table for any values that exist inside this particular set? I could do, pull me all contacts where these particular, I guess it wouldn't be account IDs right here. I didn't change that name, but account states, is true. So let's actually go back. Let's go back to our Open Execute Anonymous window. We'll see right here, this would actually be our account state set. And then we could execute from there. And that would show our states, obviously, just like it says here for account IDs. And there you go, there's the states. But let's go back to our Open Execute Anonymous window. We actually want to go back and do IDs. And we want to say this is the account ID set. Let's change these back to IDs just for kicks. Even though technically you can pass those IDs into a string like that. Okay, so now what am I going to do with this weird set of account IDs? Well, if I had a condition on it where I said, you know, pull me all accounts ID, name, billing state from account where billing state equaled New York, and I ended up with this set of IDs, then I said, well, now I want just the contacts that belong to that list. So I could say, let's actually declare a new list. Let's say list contact, and we'll say contact, we'll just say con list equals new list contact. Now I've declared it, and after I've now got a new set of IDs, I can do this. I can say my con list is going to be equal to a query that I'm going to make into Salesforce. So I can say my con list equals select name and ID and account ID from the contact table where account ID, keep doing that, account ID is in my set, which I'm calling account IDs. So now I'm going to make a query, but it's going to be based on the variable that I've created, which in this case is a set. And then I want to return that list. So system.debug, and then I'm going to put a value in. This is the contact list from the set that I created. And we'll say con list. And then we'll close that out. Let's see if I got any errors on that. I don't. Okay, so it's executing. Let's go to debug only. So now I've pulled a secondary list of contacts that all have account ID from my original list. And that way, suppose I want to update a whole bunch of contacts from a list of accounts that had a specific condition, but in order to find all those accounts, I'd have to query all those accounts first. I'm sorry, to find all the contacts to update, I have to query all the accounts first, and then I have to put all their IDs into a set, and then I can throw that set into here, and now I've got a new list of contacts that I can play with. So let's go to debug, open execute anonymous. So now I've got my contact list, and I can iterate that. I can iterate now through that list. So I can say now for contact C con list, I want to say I want C.description to equal testing the console. Oops. And then we'll close that bracket out like so. Now we can do system.debug again and say this is the contact list after description changes. And then we'll put our con list in there. Now if we execute, we should have adjusted our contact list. So, oh, you know what I forgot to do? Let's go back, debug, open execute anonymous. What I forgot to do is to query the description so we wouldn't be able to see it. So I got a description. There we go. Now we can execute it. Because I want to see that description in there. I should have changed every contact in that list to have a new description of testing the developer console. So click on debug only. So now here's my contact list before. I have name Edna, Frank, blah, blah, blah. And now I should see, because since I didn't have a description value in there, it didn't show me. But now I have name Edna, description testing the console, account ID, etc., etc. Now remember, I'm not changing it in Salesforce yet unless I do a DML operation. So I can go back to debug, open execute anonymous, come down here, and then I can say update the con list. So let's do this before we execute that. Let's actually open up. It should really apply to all contacts because I did it for all contacts that exist in the system pretty much. So as you can see right here, I have no value in my description field. So let's go execute that and see if we changed it. Execute. There we go. Pull the debug up. Let's go back to our Salesforce. Now that I've had the DML operation, let's refresh this page. And there you go. I've just updated all the contacts in that list. And that's really the bones of the developer console is you can do scripting to simply update things and make changes and do things in Salesforce without having to build a class or a trigger, and those are things that you can do on the fly. It can be dangerous, so make sure you don't do any major list updates unless you really intend on making a change. You can also test out all your variables as you're building a trigger. Oftentimes I'll go to the developer console and I'll start here or on my class. If I'm doing a specific trigger, what I'll do is I'll grab just a pretend record or a test record, and I'll give it a string. I'll just call it trigger ID or something if I'm working on a trigger, and then I would assign that trigger ID, a test record to play around with. So I go trigger ID is going to be equal to, put in one of the unique IDs from a record. In this case, we could just use this one. Oops. Must have deleted the other part. Trigger ID is equal to this, and now I've got something that I can actually start playing around with. And then I can run queries off that and kind of get an idea of what's in there, start playing around with what's going to happen to that particular record. If I need to run a query off of, this ID, pull me all related records where this ID is true, I can start playing around with that. And then a lot of times I'll build my triggers in my classes, depending on how complex they are, directly from here. And then I'll just continue to debug the entire time so that I can see, what variables I'm passing back into my, or I guess what values I'm passing back into my variables as I'm working. That way I never get to a point to where I have to start debugging something that's, I'm pretty much debugging as I go oftentimes. Okay, so that's the vast majority of what I was hoping to show you and kind of give you an idea of how to use and to play around with. Does anybody have any questions for me? I don't see any questions in my, let's see here, I don't see any in my question thing. So it doesn't look like I have any questions as of right now. I do suggest getting a developer account, playing around with the developer console, getting a feel for how it works. Play around with building variables, populating those variables, because those are really the keys as to what you're going to do with the system if you're going to be doing any Apex coding. So I suggest giving that a try, playing around with it, and become familiar with it. It's a great way to learn, and I think you'll enjoy it once you play around with it enough. Anyway, well, if that's the case, no other questions. I appreciate everybody attending. Remember to look on Kyazma's website in the future. We always have Ask the Admin trainings and things like that. There's also new user training if you have any new users at your system that you'd like to pretty much just give a general description of how to use Salesforce appropriately. Suggest sending them that way. And we appreciate your time in business, and hope you have a great day. Thanks.